So we're just going to use two different words every so often to direct our meditation, to direct our breathing. So the goal is simply to sit with your breath, paying attention to your breath, resting in the place where you most readily experience your breath. And that may be as the breath enters and leaves through the nostrils. It may be where you notice your breath in the rising and the falling of your chest, or you may notice your breathing in the expansion and contraction of your abdomen. Bring your attention to your breath in the place where you most readily experience it. And take 3 lovely deep breaths to reconnect with your breathing, with yourself. Breathing in and breathing out 3 times. Breathing in, I know I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know I am breathing out. In, out. Breathing in, I know I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know I am breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in deeply. Breathing out slowly. In breath, deep. Out breath, slow. Deep, slow. deep, slow. Breathing in calmly, breathing out at ease, calm, ease. Calm, ease. Keeping your attention on your breath as it enters calmly into your body and leaves you feeling at ease. Breathing in, I smile to myself. Breathing out, I release all tension and stress. Smile, release. Smile, release. Smile, release. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in deeply, breathing out slowly. Breathing in calmly, breathing out at ease. Breathing in, smiling to myself. Breathing out, releasing all tension. And now very slowly bring your attention back into the room in which you're sitting. Be aware of your body in contact with the chair or the cushion, with the floor, with itself. Be aware of your hands and your feet, your arms and your legs, your buttocks and your abdomen. Be aware of your lower back and your upper back. Be aware of your chest. Be aware of your shoulders, left and right. Be aware of the whole of your left arm and hand. Be aware of the whole of your right arm and hand. Be aware of your neck and your throat, your chin, your face, your nose, your eyes. Be aware of the back of your head, the top of your head, and your forehead. Become aware of your body right here and right now. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and stretch. One of the things that I've been aware of over the summer, and it's not a new thing, it's been coming for a while, is the necessity to accept myself as a human being. Sometimes it's very easy for other people to have very pious notions of what a monk is or a nun is. And sometimes it's very easy for a monk or a nun to be overwhelmed by pious notions of what I'm supposed to be. There's no sense in which I'm perfect or anywhere close to being fully realized. Let me reassure you of that. But I've become much more aware in these last few months of my humanity and the necessity to be true to my humanity. So at the moment, I'm looking for a new home, and that brings up a lot of vulnerability and anxiety. They say that one of the most stressful things to engage in life is to move house. I'm sure there are people around who would say, oh, well, if your practice was good enough, then you wouldn't be afraid or you wouldn't be anxious. And I wonder about that myself. I give myself a hard time with that thought too. But the truth is I'm a human being, just as you are, just as we all are. And there are circumstances in life when all kinds of feelings arise. So in my thinking about what to talk about in Dharma talks, I've begun to realize that I'm now very kind of influenced by talking about things, not in terms of ideals, but in terms of what it is to be really human and how we work with that, or how I work with it. You may work with it very differently from me, and that's just fine. We all have to find our own way to work with the person we are. We can't expect ourselves to fit into all kinds of molds. One of the interesting aspects of the story of Cinderella is that one of the ugly stepsisters decides that she's going to chop up her foot so that it fits into the glass slipper when the prince's representative comes around to the house. And so she does. She slices up her foot. She turns her foot into something that it is not in order to fit the glass slipper so that she might win the prince. Well, what she's done is betrayed who she really is. She's betrayed herself. And who knows, maybe the handsome prince isn't worth winning anyway. So my whole way of thinking about things has changed over this last little while. And I will bring that into the talks I give, including tonight's talk. And tonight's talk is, I think it's labelled The Dharma According to Cliff Richards. So what I'm going to do is ask Meredith to share with us a very famous song by Cliff Richards. Now, this is the name of this song, which is Summer Holiday, was the name of the film that he starred in 1963 when I was 11. And in 1963, when I was 11, I remember my mother taking my sister and my brother with my aunts and her children to see Summer Holiday at the Picture Theatre in Adelaide. And for all of us, Cliff Richards was a totally gorgeous young man, and he sang so beautifully, and the whole film was very romantic, and we loved it. And interestingly, about a week later, my dad came home from work with the record of Summer Holiday so that we could play the songs on our little record player that we had so many years ago, 60 years ago. Gosh, what happened to those 60 years? Anyway, I'm going to ask Meredith if she will play Cliff Richards singing Summer Holiday.
Sure, here it comes. So if you can't hear the sound, just let me know. I've tested, it should work well. Here we go.
And sing along if you want to.
We're all going on a summer holiday. No more working for a week or two. Fun and laughter on our summer holiday. No more worries for me or you for a week or two. We're going where the sun shines brightly. We're going where the sea is blue. We've seen it in the movies. Now let's see if it's true. Everybody has a summer holiday, doing things they always wanted to. So we're going on a summer holiday to make our dreams come true for me and you. We're going where the sun shines brightly. We're going where the sea is blue. We've seen it in the movies. Now let's see if it's true. Everybody has a summer holiday, doing things they always wanted to. So we're going on a summer holiday to make our dreams come true for me and you.
So I wonder how many people remember that. Beautiful.
I've never seen Cliff Richard this young before.
No. No. Well, I think he's getting on to 75 or 80 or something now.
Yeah, I only see the older
Yeah.
featured.
Yes. Well, there's a Dharma lesson in itself, isn't it?
Interesting. Can't wait to hear.
Anyway, I introduced that song because this year, Joey and Lucy and I went on a summer holiday. We went on a road trip across Victoria to Geelong, and then we caught the boat to Tasmania, and we travelled all around Tasmania and had a really lovely holiday. And it was we stayed with a number of friends of mine that I'd made friends of when I lived in Hobart, and we stayed in the country. We stayed in Hobart itself. We had a lovely 4 or 5 days at the beach in just across the water from Port Arthur, and the dogs just every day went for a run along the beach, and it was such a joyful time. And one of the ways in my life in which I experience mudita, or sympathetic joy, is when I watch my dogs running along the beach, and they're so joyful and I feel so joyful for them. So it was a really, really lovely holiday. Why did I go on this holiday, this summer holiday? Last year and a few years before it have been very challenging for me in all kinds of ways. They were very challenging for me in my relation to the work that I used to do, supervising students in clinical pastoral education classes. Very challenging in terms of maintaining a small sangha. Very challenging in some ways because of my health. But I think mostly very challenging because, as you know, last June, my brother died, and my brother and I loved each other very much. And so it's been a very, very difficult time in lots of ways coming to terms with the death of my brother. So I decided that we were going to have a holiday and get right out of the place and enjoy the beach and the sun and the beautiful nature that's available to us, both in rural Victoria and in rural Tasmania, or in Tasmania generally. And so we did, and we had a lovely time. Now, quite often, Buddhists think that insight or understanding comes about as a result of suffering. We have some big major thing in our life that brings suffering into our life, and that's when we start looking for the Dharma, or we start understanding the Buddha's teaching more deeply. But I was really interested to notice that it was in the context of this really happy, lovely time that insight came to me, that an understanding of something that I hadn't understood before came to me. So it's a good thing to know that you don't have to suffer in order to understand truth and love. What happened was that I went back to this place called Hobart, and Tasmania generally, where I had lived for nearly 7 years, from 2010 through to the beginning of 2017. The reason I went to Hobart there were a number of reasons. My intention for going to Hobart was in order to do a PhD in Buddhist studies, which I never completed. I also went on to Tasmania because I was offered a position as a chaplain in a hospice. So I was working with people who were reaching the end of their lives. And I was inspired to do that by the fact that I had been with my mother when she died and cared for her. And I thought, I've got some kind of competency in this field. I might do it professionally. And so I went and worked in the Whittle ward in Hobart, which is a hospice. I wanted to continue working in the area of clinical pastoral education with a supervisor in Hobart. And I wanted to be part of a more stable Buddhist community than I had here in Adelaide. And in Hobart, there's a little Zen group called Mountains and Rivers Zen Group. So I joined that. And that was my intention for going to Hobart. And I did engage with all of my intentions. I did start a PhD. I did continue working in chaplaincy. I did continue training in clinical pastoral education. And I was part of a Buddhist community, not only the Mountains and Rivers Zen Group, but I established something called Buddhist Contemplative Care Tasmania, which was a group of Buddhists interested in pastoral care and contemplative care. And so we established that community too. So I did engage with all of my intentions, but it didn't always make me happy. While there is much about Tasmania that I loved it then and I still love it, while I made some precious and life-changing friendships over the almost 7 years I lived there, while I was very engaged in all I did and all I set out to do, I was regularly very lonely and I became disenchanted with my life in Hobart. But when I went back this time for a holiday, I felt very much at ease. I really enjoyed being in Hobart and in the rest of Tasmania. And I didn't realise this until a friend of mine and I were driving from Hobart across to the place where we stayed near the beach. And we went through a small town called Sorell, which had a very hard time in the beginning of Hobart's history. It was a place where there were a lot of convicts living and there was a lot of, what can I say, mistreatment and killing of Aboriginal people. So Sorell was has been a fairly challenging place, or has presented many challenges in its lifetime. But we stopped in Sorell at a banjos shop. Now, I don't know whether banjos exists in Sydney. It doesn't in Adelaide, but it's a kind of like Baker's Delight. It's what's that word? Groups of shops that they sell a name.
Chain. It's a chain.
Chain. It's
Yeah.
got another name too, but I can't remember what that is. And so I went to the banjos in Sorell and I ordered food and everything. But I had a really lovely time talking to the young woman who was serving me, and we were both full of smiles and it was very lovely. And I thought, gosh, this is really different. Something has changed in me. In the past, I wouldn't have been quite so open, quite so friendly. In the past, I would have been more on my guard. What's changed for me? And as I reflected on all of that, I realised that my intentions for my life in Hobart had solidified into expectations. And I held very fast to my expectations. It was almost impossible for me to let go, to open my hand and let go of my expectations and to be present to what was actually there. And these were expectations around the university, around clinical pastoral education, around the Buddhist community, and so on. I held so fast to these contexts in which I sought to express my intentions that they limited the world I engaged with and the life I lived. I could have had a much richer and freer life had I not held so tightly to my expectations based in my intentions for my life there. While I never considered disrobing and leaving the monk's life, I did wonder whether being a monk limited the life I lived and the friends I had. After all, what do you talk about to a monk other than problems? Quite often people wouldn't know what to talk about. And I often thought to myself, would my life here be different if I wasn't a monk? And so over these last weeks, as I've been preparing this talk, I've thought about what were the sources of my discontent in Hobart. And I think that it's not just specific to Hobart. I think the sources of discontent are a more general experience in life. So I came up, these are two stories that I want to tell you that are actually true, real, of my experience. One Saturday when I was living in West Hobart, which really looked down over South Hobart, which is a part of Hobart I really love. It's a very old part of Hobart and it's very beautiful. But I was waiting for a group of Buddhists to come and we were going to have our initial conversation about what might be possible for us as Buddhist chaplains in Tasmania. So I was standing at the kitchen sink, which was a very tiny sink, and I was making scones. And there I was, you know, sifting the flour and rubbing the butter in and all of that sort of thing. And as I was doing it, I got really grumpy with Hobart. Hobart wasn't living up to my expectations. And I just kept on going like this and being really grumpy and grouchy and yelling at Hobart and telling it off and all of those things. When suddenly I looked out through the kitchen window and there was this big rhododendron tree with millions of purple rhododendrons on it, all of them looking at me and saying, "You haven't even noticed us." I was so caught in my own, I suppose, anger really, that came out of my expectations that I didn't even notice the beauty that was around me. I didn't even notice the beauty that was literally staring me in the face. So that was one very kind of transformative experience that I had. And the second one I had many years before that when I was training as a bhikkhu in the monastery I was in Southern California. I was the only, not only was I the only European or the only Caucasian, I was the only Australian. And I think some of the monks there thought that an Australian was, because I was an American, I wouldn't be able to speak English or things like that. And I remember one monk, Thay, how he said to me, "I think I need to give you some English lessons." And I said to him, "You know what? My ancestors invented the English language. So I won't teach you Vietnamese if you don't teach me English." Anyway, it was a very interesting time in my life and a very challenging time and also a very lonely time, not unlike the time I had in Hobart. And I used to think to myself, gosh, these monks, they're not very friendly. They're full of bossing me around and all of that. And there was bossing around that went on. I remember our abbot, who was a lovely man, a very kind and generous man, said to me through an interpreter, "Thay, Thong, Phap, I noticed the other monks boss you around all the time. What you have to do is when they boss you around, put your hands together and you say, 'Yes, Thay, thank you, Thay.' And then you go away and do what you want to do." So there was, I mean, it's very interesting. I had two abbots in America and they were both really lovely men who were very supportive and caring of this monk with the long white nose. Anyway, what I thought, these monks are not very, very friendly. What am I going to do about this? And that night I was sitting at my desk reading the Dhammapada. And there's a verse, I think it's a verse 184, but it might be verse 185, I can't quite remember, that says, "Patient endurance is the supreme austerity." Which is to say that it's harder to endure something patiently than it is to lie on a bed of nails. And I think that's probably true. So I thought, oh, that's what I need to do. I need to patiently endure these other monks. And then one day I was walking down after lunch in the monastery, you couldn't go to have your siesta straight away. You had to go and do some exercise. So I would walk all the way down to the road, check out what's in the letterbox, and then walk all the way back up. And as I was walking down, I noticed another monk, a very old man who had been in the Army of the South during the American War in Vietnam. And he was walking down the path, kicking a stone ahead of him. And I thought, gosh, that's a very human thing to do. Everybody walks along kicking stones, no matter what their ethnic background is. And then I started to think about him. And I started to think about the monastery, and I realized that I haven't come to this monastery to make friends necessarily. I've come here to train as a monk. And that's not necessarily the same thing. And I thought to myself also, these monks, they may well be being very kind and generous to me in a Vietnamese way. And I don't understand that because I'm expecting it from a European way or an Australian way. And so I had to adjust my thinking. And then, of course, I realized there was one very old Vietnamese monk who looked like a Vietnamese hobbit. And he liked me so much that he made me a whole set of robes as a gift. And he would bring me biscuits to eat in the evening. And then there was another younger monk who was a lovely young man. And we would cook breakfast together. And it was Easter time. And Thay Duncan, he before we started cooking, he'd make noodles and we'd sit down and have noodles while everybody else was meditating. And then we'd cook together, and he was so easy to cook with. He never bossed me around. He was just really lovely to me. And on Easter Day in 2005, he came into the kitchen where I was doing something, and he said, "Come out here, Thay." And I went out, and he pointed up to the sky, and there was a beautiful full moon hanging in the sky. And that's how he was generous to this monk with the long white nose. And I just remember standing there looking at the Easter moon and bowing to it like that. So when I thought about it, I thought, no, there's a lot of generosity going on here. I just don't notice it because I'm looking through a particular perspective. That there might be people here who really care deeply for me, but they show it in a way that I don't understand because of the cultural differences between, an Anglo-Celtic Australian and a Vietnamese person. So I changed my attitude to the verse from the Dhammapada. Patient endurance is the supreme austerity. I realized that I needed to be patient with my own mind, not with them. They're fully entitled to live their own lives, to practice in their own way. The patience I needed was patience with my own mind, my own self. And so it brings me really towards the end of this Dhamma talk. There are two verses, the very first two verses in the Dhammapada, which lots of people will know. Very popular verses, but but fundamental and very important. And this is what it says. And this is from a translation of the Dhammapada by an Indian, Eknath Eyaswaran. Our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. Suffering follows an evil thought as the wheels of a cart follow the oxen that draw it. Our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. Joy follows a pure thought, like a shadow that never leaves. And that's such a profound teaching. There's only one person responsible for the joy and the sorrow in my life, and that's me. It's true, people can treat you badly, but what really matters is how you respond. And your response comes from your own mind. It doesn't come from them. And there's that lovely story. I just thought of that lovely story of the Tibetan monk who was in a camp in Tibet with the people, with the guards from the People's Republic of China. And his biggest concern was that his treatment would rob him of his compassion for his captors. Now that's extraordinary. He had sufficient control over his own mind to be concerned not so much for himself, but for the impact of the cruelty on the guards that their cruelty might have. So the first two verses of the Dhammapada tell us that both our happiness and our suffering are created in our own mind. My summer holiday reinforced this teaching for me. Our real practice is being as aware as we can be of where our mind is. My mind was in two very different places at two different times in Hobart. When I lived there, it was in a place of suffering, of anger, of grumpiness, of holding on and clinging. On my summer holiday, I had opened my hands and let go of all of that. And I was free to really enjoy what was there and available to me. Our real practice is being as aware as we can be of where our mind is. And I don't think that those verses in the Dhammapada or any other teaching about the mind and how it's at the basis of everything in our lives, I don't think it means that when things go wrong and we get grumpy and that, it doesn't mean we have to blame our mind or criticize ourselves. That's just as unhelpful. And it's even a hateful mental state. Oh, your mind is deluded. Oh, this, that, and the other. It means that we simply have to be with our minds patiently. And this patience is one of the paramis, the perfections that characterize a Buddha. It is the way of complete awareness. Patience is complete awareness and love. And we have to offer this awareness and love to ourselves, first of all. If we can't be patient with our own minds, if we can't offer ourselves understanding and love, how are we going to offer that to others? When we encounter others in a hostile, judgmental kind of way, where are our minds? Our minds would be in a place of hatred. So, to bring this to an end, living in a state of complete awareness and love, living patiently, is the best kind of summer holiday you can have. Thank you very much. And if you want to raise anything or say anything or disagree or agree or tell a bit of your own story, now's the time.
Thank you, Thay. Thank you so much. I resonate with every word you say. Your talks always touch deep in my heart. I'm so happy to hear your talk today. So I open the floor. I open the mic to the floor. To anyone who wants to share your thought or anything that you want to say today, please do so. You can unmute yourself.
Yes, I realized. If I may say a few words, say welcome back. We missed you. Thank you very much. And this talk was so human that I felt human, myself more human than before. And it's very helpful when you hear someone like you talk about our frailties, our faults, shortcomings, our learning, because we always think, oh, he's a monk, he must know everything, you know. He's a Dharma teacher, oh, he must be perfect. It's not like that. We are all human. I had a laugh because that movie was the first I understood in English, coming from Hungary and going to the movies. Cliff Richard, of course, we heard about him. And I am going on a summer holiday. Took me back to my youth. It was very nice of you. And I also had a laugh when you mentioned that they doubted your English knowledge in the USA. My little granddaughter, 3 years ago, went to Michigan State as a soccer player and to a university because she had some help money-wise. And the first thing I told her, you're going to have a lot of problem with the language. And she said, what do you mean? Considering you're Australian, you speak reasonable English, you know. And she was so surprised that even in official places, they were surprised that her English was okay. But of course, because she was born here in Sydney. Yeah. And
It shows how ignorant the American is, isn't it?
Yeah, Americans are a bit naive, I think.
Yeah.
That's the end of the world for them.
Oh,
The human warmth from your talk helped me a lot because I'm going through hard times. And the past few months, dukkha, I feel it so strongly, sometimes no reason. And I blame my mind. Frank, why do you feel so depressed? I'm not depressed. I just never been depressed. But this dukkha, the feeling, I'm over 80 now. I know that I won't be around long, naturally. But this dukkha feeling, that as the Buddha taught, that the underlying law of nature is pain, suffering, dukkha. Never felt it. Maybe with age, you feel it stronger.
I think that's true, Frank. I mean, I wonder about myself sometimes. And some people will say, oh, you're only 71. But, you know, all of my great-grandfathers, both of my grandfathers and my father were dead by the time they were 71. And we don't know how long we've got left. And it's not just age, it's, you know, our bodies are changing, our health thing. So it's, I don't think it's unreasonable to feel a little depressed. It's not unusual for older people to get a little depressed. And of course, the other thing, and I was really pleased to see your name, not Frank, but Ferenc. Which
that's the original
Hungarian. Yeah, it's lovely. I often think when I think about people, and there are some older people who can be, you know, on top of everything. Well, I'm pleased for them, but we're not all like that. And the other thing I think is that you know, we've all lived, those of us who are certainly over 70 or even over 60 have lived a long time, and we have experienced a lot of challenges in our lives, a lot of pain, a lot of, you know, all sorts of stuff. Nobody gets out of life scot-free. That's what dukkha means. And so by the time we get to our age, we're in a situation where we are processing all of that. We're trying to work it out. We're trying to come to death with an open and a joyful heart. But that takes time, and that's a lot of hard work, at least in my view. And I don't blame any older person for being a bit depressed or miserable, because life has been long and it has been challenging, and we haven't always been able to overcome things instantly. Yes. I mean, some monastics say, oh, just let go. Well, that's very nice. But letting go isn't necessarily an instantaneous thing. It's something that's a process, and you have to spend maybe quite a bit of time. And it includes, I think it includes cultivating a lot of gratitude for the good that you recognize in your life.
Yes.
But it also involves a lot of forgiveness of people who have treated you badly, and forgiveness of yourself for having treated others badly. So those two things of gratitude and forgiveness are really, I think, important practices for people as they get older.
Yeah.
And another story, one more story, Frank.
Thank you.
I went to Plum Village in the year 2000.
Oh,
I was really excited about it because I love France, and I love going to France and wandering around France. And I learned French at school, so I get to speak French, and it still comes out pretty well. And I put that down in part to some of my French ancestors. Not that I had that many, but I had enough. And I remember sitting, you get jobs. You have to do jobs at Plum Village. So one of them was cutting up vegetables. And I was sitting with this couple from another European country, not France. And it became obvious that they preferred a New Zealander to an Australian.
oh.
And the lady said to me, "You speak English quite well." I said, "Well, that's because, as I said before, my ancestors invented it. And I happen to be a poet in my language and blah, 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 blah." She said, "What I mean is that you don't have a strong Australian accent." And what I said was, you know, the only language that I can listen to where I understand the nuances of feelings is Australian English. That's my mother tongue. And it doesn't matter where the person is from in Australia, and we all have slightly different accents around the country. There is something about listening to my nation's version of English that touches me in the way that I'm not touched, say, listening to American English. And I came away and I thought, gosh, they don't know anything about us, you know. And I don't think I've ever quite forgiven that woman for what she said. If I had forgiven her, I wouldn't be telling you this story, but I am telling you this. So and then one other time I was teaching in Zimbabwe, and I lived in a house with a young English woman. And one day she said to me, "You know, you speak my language, English." And just like that, I thought of the best possible answer I could give. I said, "You know, I speak a version of the language that my ancestors spoke, and you speak a version of the English language that your ancestors spoke. We both speak different versions of the same language, but I most certainly don't speak your language." And I thought, oh, that was a really good answer to give. But it is true that there's, you know, people don't necessarily hold Australians in great respect.
Which they should.
I don't know, but it's certainly something to deal with when it comes up. And that would be the same. That would be the same. You know, like I had a very dear friend in Paris who was a Quebecoise. She was from Quebec, and the French would always say, "Oh, you speak your French is so cute," which was very patronising. And she didn't like the French particularly, so it was, you know, it's very interesting. I think it's called colonialism.
Yeah. Just one more word about languages. I have two daughters marrying, well, two son-in-laws. One is Greek and one is Jakarta Chinese. He's, well, doesn't speak Chinese well, but speaks Bahasa Indonesia. So the first grandson, 28 years ago, for 5 years, he stayed with me and with my wife. And he spoke Hungarian well, he grown up with it because we hardly spoke English then. And he learned Hungarian. That was his mother tongue. And people told us off that the poor boy won't be able to communicate in this country because he doesn't speak proper English. You won't believe it. He became a high school teacher, English and Japanese. And the Hungarian grammar helped him with the Japanese a lot. So young people can learn so well. But we always had funny things like teaching the kids Greek and Hungarian at the same time. The grandmother from the Greek side shouting at them in Greek, and I did the same in Hungarian. But we never had any problem. So it's a fantastic thing, language.
Yes, and great richness.
Yeah, it is.
So does anybody else have something they'd like to share?
Thay, just now when you talk about you've done so many things when you were in Tasmania, in Hobart, and you still feel disenchanted, that really gave me some insight. I think many of us probably have that experience. I think throughout our life we've been trying to do a lot of things, and come to think of it, it's not like we don't enjoy the thing that we're doing. But as you say that, I think, yeah, I do feel sometimes disenchanted in, overall. So it's so great that you talk about this, and then, let me kind of think about, and you bring out about expectations. It just suddenly struck me. It's like, yeah, we've done a lot of things. Maybe we just, like put the expectation too high for us. So everything we did is like not up to that expectation. So overall, then you feel very disenchanted. I really have that experience myself. So thank you, Dave, for bringing it up.
Well, and people will quite often say to me, oh, look at all you've done and how many people's lives you've touched and blah, blah, blah. And I can't even think about that because my mind is with all the failure and all the expectations that didn't get realized and all of that. So it's really still the product of our own minds, our own, our own lack of what we call in Buddhism saddha or shraddha, which is confidence, faith in ourselves. It's much of our, all of our suffering. It's not that we invented it. We did suffer at the hands of other people who weren't as kind as they might have been, or who were hurt themselves and didn't know how else to treat us other than in a negative way. But the point is that once we recognize the roots of our suffering, then it's up to us to do something about it, and that includes our expectations of ourselves, and the expectations can be amongst the worst things that we have to deal with, is our own expectations of ourselves and of each other. I mean, I knew a lady who came to me at a Vietnamese retreat, and she said, "Would you please talk to my son? He's not a very good boy. He wants to be a veterinarian, and I want him to be a doctor." And I said, "No, I won't talk to him. There is absolutely nothing wrong with him wanting to." And he was a lovely boy. He was just a very quiet, peaceful, young Vietnamese Australian boy, and he was obviously a good son. But there was this expectation that was being placed on him that in which he was through which he was seen as deficient, because he wasn't going to live up to this expectation of becoming a doctor. He'd rather hang out with non-human animals, as indeed so do I quite often. But the expectations that we have of each other can be really harmful and hurtful. But in the end, it's us that has to deal with that. We can't have expectations that others will fix it up for us, I don't think. And the other thing is that we need to be very kind and loving towards ourselves, because we can really be tough on ourselves and judgmental. Certainly, I'm not sure about other ethnic groups, but for the Anglo-Celtic Australian, there's a lot of self-recrimination and self-judgment and that sort of thing. And that's some of the hurt that we bring to the Dharma when we come to Buddhism. How do we heal ourselves of that? And one of the answers comes from that wonderful Thai master, Venerable Ajahn Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, who says that what you need to do is lots of metta practice towards yourself, loving kindness, and spend a lot of time in nature, and become kind of immersed in nature. And so those are things that we, and it's true when when I take Joey and Lucy to the beach and we walk along the beach, or we go to the forest, Bandelier Forest, there's already the heart already, the pain that's in the heart can lift really easily when we do those things. I'm not sure if I talk too much.
No, we still have time, Thay.
Anybody else with some thoughts?
Any
Well,
thought?
The worst kind of expectation is when you get married and you expect all the happiness from the partner. I think it's a real killer.
You can blame Disneyland for that.
Yeah.
My father used to have these, all he ever wanted my mother to be, or any woman that he loved, and he loved a number of women, was that they should be basically someone from Disneyland who was just always loving and always this and always that. And he never got that, certainly never got it from my mum.
Happily ever after, is it?
No, it wasn't a happy ever after story. She never got, her expectations of him were never realised either. So yes, you're right, where expectations come up in a marriage or a relationship, even a friendship, that's usually spells doom, really, and a lot of sorrow. And in a marriage, it's not just sorrow for the two adults involved, it's sorrow for their children.
Yeah.
Speaking from personal experience.
But Thay, what do you think? What's your view about like expectation in terms of, you expect you have this expectation of yourself to do good, or like to perform things better. I think that's normal, isn't it? When whatever you do something, of course you have the expectation of like trying to achieve, do the best that you can. Isn't it? Or it's an expectation.
Well, it is an expectation, but not all expectations are unreasonable. As long as you accept that you may do your best, but it still may not work out. It may not. You may not achieve what you set out to achieve, but as long as you can go in the direction of that. But and that's reasonable. What I was just thinking of something, a response to that.
It's the awareness of, or the acceptance of what is. I think it's like you have the expectation. I think most of the time, as you say, that we only look at those things that we have not achieved and then ignore the things that we have achieved. So yeah, so I think we have that expectation, as you say, that whatever happens, if we can accept the outcome, I think that's a practice, isn't it? Talking about expectation.
And I think another helpful practice is to regularly sit down and look at the life you've lived and look at how extraordinary this life has been, because there's lots of challenges in it too, but there's lots of suffering in life, but there's also lots of overcoming of it. And it's not all suffering at all. And we can look at the lives that we've led, and we can think of the things that we're grateful for. And I think we need to do that on a regular basis, and to look at the things to be really clear about the things we have done well, the things that we have achieved that have been beneficial to ourselves and others. I think that's a worthwhile practice too. In a lot of Buddhism, and I know Vietnamese Buddhism the best, but there's a practice of called Samhoi, which means it gets translated as repentance, but I don't like that word because it's got certain connotations as a result of my Christian upbringing, so I'd prefer not to use that word. But Thich Nhat Hanh has a word for it, which is called beginning anew. We start over. That's what the Greek word metanoia actually means, is that when we recognize things we've done that aren't good, then we start again. But we don't judge ourselves, and we let go of that as quickly as we can. But I think that, and of course, in Judaism, every year they have a whole weekend called Yom Kippur, where people repent of the terrible things that they've done in the year, or not terrible, but where they feel they've not been good people, and you go to synagogue, and there's all of that. And I went to synagogue in Adelaide a couple of years ago. I have a friend who's she's the rabbi in Adelaide, the only rabbi at the moment, I think. And yes, there was a focus on repentance for that congregation, but she also read something written by a rabbi which focused on what I have done well. And it was a really lovely idea that Yom Kippur is not just about saying I'm a bad person, I'm a bad person, I'm a very bad person, but saying, and I also have the capacity to be a good person, and this is the way I've done it. So there are many practices, I think, like that, where we have to remember what we've done that's brought real benefit to the world and to ourselves, and things that we are grateful for in our lives, I mean, if I sit and think about my life, and I did this recently with a friend in Victoria whom I met and became friends with in Zimbabwe. She pointed out that I lived in a small African village, no electricity, no running water, very few resources for teaching, just very basic foods. Unfortunately, I was at that time not as keen on mangoes as I am now. But if I'd have liked mangoes, then I would have been a very fat man. But and then she pointed out that how the bravery that it took for me to come from South Australia and live in rural Africa, and enjoy it, and love my students, and I didn't want to go and live in the city. I wanted to keep working where I was working. And I never thought about it like that before. I thought, oh, yes. And I think that I'm not sure I taught anything that was particularly useful. I mean, I was teaching Cambridge O levels, so that meant I was teaching Shakespeare and things like that to rural Africans. But what I did show them was that a white man could love a black person, and a white man could allow a black person to love him. That's and I come away from that and I think, well, if that's what really happened, and it felt like that's what was really happened, then you've done really well. And it's the same for all of us. We all have things in our lives that we've done beautifully well. The care we've shown, the love that parents have for their children. the love that children have for their parents. Sometimes, or quite often, more often than not, that's really heroic. That's really heroic. What you do for your children can be quite heroic. It just doesn't get the social recognition that it deserves. So I think we need to look at our lives in that way as well. That's a really important practice. It's to look at our lives to see where we have done well and what blessing we have brought to the world in our lives. And maybe to share it with others. A small Sangha can sit and, it's not about bragging, it's about recognizing and being authentic and honest. This is what I've done with my life.
Just one more word. I wanted to say thank you to Thay, and then especially to Meredith. Meredith is an example for all of us. Last Sunday, she gave up the whole day, not seeing her family, but looking after us in the library for a whole day of sitting and walking meditation and Dhamma talks. So Meredith, thank you very much, dear. You are an example for me.
Thank you, Frank.
Next life, if we meet again, I'll marry you. If you say yes. Because you're
Frank,
a real
my
person.
honor. My honor.
But
you
no,
very much.
no expectation.
No expectation.
No. Hello, Pat. Hello, Pat. No expectation.
But
Yeah.
she may be reborn as a man, although you could marry her.
Yeah.
I forgot that. I forgot that.
Yeah. You can be a woman and then you can feel how your wife was feeling.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, it's a funny thing.
Thank you,
Yes,
Thay,
yes,
for that. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Frank.
Oh, no, that's okay. It's just one observation. I've been married over 60 years, same girl. And when you get married, man thinks that the woman you marry won't change. And then the woman thinks that the man will change with her. And they are both wrong. Think about that. That's my experience.
What's your experience again?
When you get married, the man thinks that the woman won't change at all in the coming years. And the woman thinks that the man will change. And they are both wrong.
Yes.
Oh, I'm experienced in that respect.
You've actually reminded me of one set of great-great-grandparents. My great-great-grandmother was born here in South Australia in the 1840s, and she married an Irishman, and she died very young. And my great-great-grandpa, Richard Kerwin, he was a bit of a ratbag, really. And I asked one of my distant cousins, why did she marry him? Apart from the fact that he was handsome, he was an alcoholic as well. And she said she believed that her love would change him.
Yeah.
She was wrong.
He was wrong, as I said.
And then there was another little bit of the story. My great-grandmother used to save money to buy flour to make the bread. And my great-great-grandpa used to pinch the money to go and buy grog with it, to go and buy alcohol. And I was told this story by my grandfather's cousin 100 years after it had happened. And I thought, my poor great-great-grandfather, he's remained unforgiven for 100 years. So I went outside and I stood down by the Chook's house and I held my hands up at the sky and I said, Richard, on behalf of your entire family, I forgive you. Go. And I don't know whether he did go in peace or not, but I'm always grateful. I'm always grateful to him that through him I got to have partially an Irish heritage, which I really love. So, you know, can't be too bad a fella. You were going to say, Patricia.
Oh, I was just going to say, thank you for that reminder of, I guess, allowing in what other people have observed about you, you know, particularly people who have known you either for a long time or known you quite well in a specific sort of context, you know, because I think, and you said it a bit earlier too, and I'm still a bit unsure how to kind of redress this, but you know, people do say, oh, look at all the good things you've done, you know, you've touched these people's lives, you've made these contributions, and you hear it and you go, yeah, sure, but somehow you don't feel you know, and I think you were talking about that is it because did you say, and it was a little while back, so I've forgotten, you know, that it could be connected to the fact that one is looking somewhere else to do something, you know, like to sort of do the PhD or to you know, do something that you're sort of saying, oh yes, it's important, it's interesting what you're saying about this, what I've done, but what I'm really focused on now is this, something unreal almost, you know.
I
So,
think that response, certainly that I have, is part of my conditioning in my family. There was a sense, well, I mean, I'll just be frank about my own family. It's all I can tell you. That both of my parents had very little self-confidence because that's how they were brought up. And they set out to bring me up in the same way. I mean, I know they loved me, but, you know, there was a lot of criticism, and I was the eldest child, so I had to be a model for the other two, but the other two also have grown up with a lack of self-confidence too. So I think it comes from our conditioning, and it's not just, you know, it wasn't just my mum and dad. It was the conditioning that they experienced, that they received. That, you know, I remember my mum telling me a story of when she was a little girl, how her mother had she got ulcers on her legs, and she was told by her mother, my grandmother, whom I really loved, she was told that my mother's birth caused the ulcers. So my mother grew up with this idea that she caused her mother's pain, So I think that's true for lots of people. And my mother would have transmitted that to us. I mean, I have a lot of fear around poverty and homelessness because I grew up at a time when my mum had experienced the Depression. And I mean, I don't know what happened in Sydney, but in Adelaide, a lot of people lost their homes due to bank foreclosures in the Depression and had to live on the banks of the River Torrens. So there's a great deal of fear for many working class people about poverty and homelessness, and that gets transmitted so that I have that fear and that. And so I think a lot of it is the conditioning that we receive at the hands of our families. And I think that the corollary of that is that we think that we've never done, and I think I've never done enough. I have to do a PhD to prove that I'm a really good fella. I did a master's degree, and I was the first person in my father's family in the history of the human species ever to go to university. I got a master's degree, but that wasn't enough. I then had to do something else to keep proving that I was acceptable as a human being. And I struggle with that all the time. More recently, I took on, when I was first ordained, but I'd had this habit before of, the task of the monk, in my case, is to build Sangha. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to build Sanghas with lay people and teach the Dharma and all of those kind of things. I would say that my attempt at building Sangha has been monumentally unsuccessful. Until this week, this very week, when I realized, but that's not my job. I have to be the monk I am, not some monk who's gonna, you know, I'm not ever going to establish a monastery. I'm never going to be, you know, establish a consistent lay sangha. I've got to figure out what my life is really about and be truthful to who I am. So, but I inherited those views of what my life should be because I didn't have sufficient confidence in who I actually was. I had so little confidence in who I actually was that it's taken me all this time to figure out what my life should be about. So I think, that's what I think, but we really have to work hard with our conditioning and look for who we really are. Look for the human being that we really are, not some other idea that somebody else comes up with or some ideal. I mean, of course, monastic has to live according to the Vinaya or the Bodhisattva precepts. But, you know, I have a saying, and I say it to myself regularly when I might swear, and I say to myself, you know, hit your thumb with that hammer, and you say certain old Anglo-Saxon words, and I think to myself, I can't always do what I'm supposed to do. I have to just be myself. And if the world doesn't like that, well, that's not my problem. My practice is to be true to myself and to you know, to be myself within the context of someone practicing the Dharma. Does that make any sense to
Yes, it did.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
dedicate the merit? Yes.
Yes.
May the wholesome energy that we have generated here tonight and at any other time be for the benefit of all living beings. May all living beings know peace and joy and the causes of peace and joy. May all living beings be free from suffering. May all living beings walk in the path of the Buddha, path of truth and love. And may we continue to walk that path together. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
and
Thank you.
good night.